start with why we're really here. You know, after a period of global lockdowns, we've seen huge surges in online shopping, which makes 2020 the year you can dare to go global. The UK is the third biggest e-commerce market in the world, and all you need is the right direction and conviction to reach your global audience. So do you think this is the right time to open your business doors to the world? If the answer is yes, you've come to the right place. This webinar is designed to answer some of the most frequently asked questions by small and medium-sized businesses who are looking to expand internationally. We're really glad you're here and ready to learn from our expert panelists. Our goal is for you to come away from this webinar better equipped and more confident for expanding your business globally. So let me introduce some of the experts that we have on our panel, starting with Emmanuel Adam. He's the Executive Director and Chief Trade Policy Officer for British American Business. He's responsible for the development and execution of the BAB's wider policy, advocacy and trade and investment portfolio, both in the US and the UK, and has been widely recognised for both the UK and US governments for his trade outreach campaigns and his approach to making trade promotion accessible to smaller businesses. We have Mark Paquette, the Export Academy Advisor for the Department of International Trade. He is an Export Academy Trade Advisor based at the Department of International Trade in the West Midlands. He has worked for export markets around the world for over 30 years and is well qualified to offer practical insights into the best way to operate overseas. We've got David Weatherhead, the Head of SME and Mid-Corporate Trade Global Transaction Banking for Lloyd's Bank. He's the head of the group, and he supports customers with trade solutions, allowing improved working capital whilst mitigating their risk. From a UPS perspective, we've got Oliver Horn, our e-commerce customer marketing manager. Is an experienced professional within logistics and supply chain with a specialised focus on e-commerce, overseeing product launches, digital and physical campaigns, insight creation, competitive and market intelligence, ideation and strategy, as well as supporting the UPS sales force with accelerating revenue growth. Andrew Fisher is our European region brokerage supervisor and has over 3 decades of customs and brokerage experience here at UPS. He's an expert within his domain and has been involved with all aspects of brokerage, including dealing with Brexit, and has played a key role in supporting UPS and its customers with the challenges of changing trade regulations, customs and brokerage processes, which is no small feat. It's very complicated. So we have a list of pre-submitted questions. This will be more of a conversation between our panelists. We want to make sure that we get yield as much experience and get as much information from them as possible. If there's any questions that you want to submit in the chat, we'll try and get to them, but if we don't, we can potentially follow up. So I guess to start us off then, we'll start with why export? So one of the questions that's come through is there a right time for my business to go global, and why should I consider it? I think, Andrew, if we start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I think really some of the things Morgan's already said, really. Obviously, since Brexit, the government is trying to push global Britain. And now is a good time to go global. There's a whole world of opportunity out there for you to grow your businesses, sell your products and goods around the world, not just, in the UK, whether that's the EU or further afield. And there's a lot of advice and help out there, whether that's from UPS or from the government, and I'm sure we'll come on to that later, to grow jobs coming out of COVID. There's a whole world of opportunity for e-commerce and internet shipping around the world to make your business a success.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just add to that. So I mean, the question is at the right time for my business. Obviously, and we'll touch later on as we go through. There's another question about how on the strategy to set your business up for global e-commerce. But you know, if you're set up and established and ready to go, then it's definitely the right time to be thinking about exporting globally. I mean, although our domestic market is buoyant from an e-commerce perspective, and the forecasted growth for cross-border e-commerce is significant, and even though that's slowed after the last 2 years that we've seen, global e-commerce is still forecasted to grow at over 12%. And you talk about global, EU is still open for business and still remains one of the top export destinations for the UK. We still see the trend for non-EU countries now starting to increase. And when you look further afield from the EU, it can be done fairly easily with established e-commerce countries like, you know, US and Australia, where there's no language barriers, there's high basket value amounts where goods can be imported free of taxes and duties and can be set up and easily shipped to you quickly. And these countries offer high opportunity and are already purchasing from the UK. And so, and that will increase as well with the sort of the accessibility to new markets as we see the country moving through and adding these new trade agreements that we keep seeing coming up over the last few months.
I guess, Mark, for you, from the Department of International Trade, everyone should be considering it. You know, is that the right time, especially for these small and medium businesses?
Good afternoon, everyone, first of all. Yeah, I think it is the right time. I mean, I think one of the lessons that we've learned from the past couple of years with COVID and the world's become a smaller place now. Look at what we're doing today. This, you know, you can reach out, and from an e-commerce point of view, people are, you know, it's the way forward, I think, in terms of smaller businesses being able to reach globally. And I mean, we'd be foolish to say there aren't perceived barriers in some context. There actually are barriers, but they're surmountable. We can get around problems. For every problem, there's a solution. And I think what we need to be looking at, and small to medium-sized businesses especially, is, you know, the world is out there, and just, you know, have a look and investigate and see. Due diligence is called for, of course it is. Make sure, you know, you do the right things in terms of paperwork, and if you do that, then the world really is, you know, it's out there to be had. So yeah, I mean, what's the definition of the right time? Now is the right time. You know, tomorrow's the right time. You can't do it yesterday. So, you know, the right time is now, isn't it?
Yeah. So Emmanuel, I mean, following on from that, I mean, it is the right time, but I mean, you've had experiences with different policies, different trade rules. I mean, do you think it's the right time? Do you think we can overcome some of the challenges with some of the international trade barriers?
Well, thank you, Morgan, and thanks everyone at UPS for having me. I'm sure, learn a lot myself from this session. But to answer your question, the answer is twenfold. On the one hand, is it the right time? That depends, of course, on your business and whether you feel, you know, you need to acquire a new audience, need to find a new audience, new market shares in other parts of the world outside of the UK. Your business will tell you, and often, you know, you find business that say, you know, we have saturated the UK market and we have explored a few other bits and pieces here and there, but now if we really want to grow the business, we have to go abroad. So again, your business will tell you if you feel, okay, it's time for us to explore, or by the way, if you feel that your product will be more attractive to customers in other parts of the world than it is in the UK, which is also which can also be the case. And in fact, we have had companies who decided to have a UK company, but the bigger office actually in another part of the world because they find the bigger customer bases over there. But I just want to echo what Oliver and Mark said, that for a UK business, it is a good time to look at exporting because the UK government pretty much endorses any kind of export ambition and supports companies that are looking to expand abroad in a very extensive way. And that's not something that you find in many other countries in the same way. And that's certainly something that should encourage companies to look abroad, because there's an existing support system that we can go back to later on in the session.
Maybe, David, to add to that, I mean, there's some challenges, especially for smaller businesses, right? I mean, there's a lot of risk when you go abroad and some challenges. Are there anything that we could, are there any tips that you've got in there, or is it the right time? Are there supports in place from a financial perspective?
Yeah, absolutely there is, and good afternoon to everyone. I think from a financial perspective, it's always challenging, but actually now is a good time because banks are keen to support companies through their working capital cycle. And, you know, that's become more important as we've seen the working capital cycle extended, pressure on commodity prices, so prices increasing. You know, we're keen for companies to diversify, find the new markets, and, you know, we'll support them through their working capital needs on that, but also the risk mitigation, making sure they've got the right solution in place. Overlaying that, you know, the government support and, you know, what the government have introduced under their UK Export Finance General Export Facility has widened the ability to support companies. So it's enabled companies to explore the new markets. You know, we are keen for companies to explore those markets. They have to be very careful. You know, if they're going into an overseas market, you have to ensure you're going to get paid. You know, that's the critical and the lifeline for that. It's making sure that, you know, logistically you can get the goods to that location. You've got to set up to actually be able to sell them in that location. So, you know, there's lots of factors to consider, but actually now is a good time. And, you know, when we see a domestic market get squeezed in certain products, actually finding that alternative market overseas. And, you know, there's plenty of data that can find that right market for you and, you know, ensure that you maintain your margins and your profit levels, you know, even with increasing supply chain costs that most companies are facing at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, so it is a great time to export, I think we can all safely say, but, you know, for companies looking to pivot or expand globally, how do you identify and access the best markets? What can you consider? Maybe, Mark, we could start with you.
Well, again, I think one of the things I'd point out is it's always important to do due diligence. I mean, you have to consider the markets that you're looking at with a very, you know, you have to be careful. The one thing I think we come into contact with in my role is a lot of clients, they know or they think they know that they want to export, but they're not quite sure. They reel off a whole load of countries that they're looking to expand into. But I think rather than use a scattergun approach, I think it's best, I would always advise for companies to be selective, use more like a sniper's approach, as it were, to look at targets in a market and then perfect it and then build on it from there. Scattergun rarely works, but then you have to get into the one of the things I think we need to emphasize is the fact that English is spoken around the world, and I would be looking to avoid any kind of language barriers or because potentially you can trip yourself up if you're not careful, and certainly people's perception can be different if they're having to translate it from English into whatever their native tongue is. So we need to be mindful of that. But in terms of identifying the markets, I think the one thing I'd say about British products, and I would say it given that I work for the DIT, I guess, but there's still, we've got credibility around the world with the products that we supply here from the UK. People look for that. You know, there's still, despite what we might think in the UK ourselves, perhaps, abroad, people look and say when it's manufactured in the United Kingdom, people regard it as a quality. And for that, there is, and people are still willing to pay a premium for. And so, you know, we touched upon the UK market being saturated. I think for a lot of companies, they should be looking at export because in some instances with certain products, you can look at actually achieving a better margin by exporting because people will pay for it overseas, you see.
Well, I think as a business, and I'm looking at this in a very practical way, but this is because that's the way we often work with companies who work with British American business and its partners. I think identifying the market may depend on at least three different things. One is, which I alluded to earlier, if you're a business and you feel, you know, that your product could be attractive to a customer base outside of the UK, you do a market study and find out where that could be. And by the way, that could be something that can be supported by government or private stakeholders. There are a number of sources out there and grants out there that would co-finance, for example, foreign market studies that help you identify a specific market. Two recent examples that we worked with, one of which is VitaPod. It's a drink system that adds vitamins to your water, and it's, you know, you put a bottle in and then you can turn it into a drink with vitamins and different flavors. They immediately thought, you know, the demand for these kind of systems is much greater in the US, which is why we should probably focus our marketing and business focus onto the US and start quite early on going into the market. Another company that we recently worked with is an interesting one. It's actually one that produces gravestones for pets, and so, you know, and they were fortunate to have some funding from the Welsh government that helped them identify markets around the world that had a big pet population outside of the UK. So, and that helped them define, okay, what are good markets for us to go into. A third one, which I think is the in a way the easiest one, if that is the case, go where your existing customers are. So what we often see is that we have companies based in the UK who either receive an inquiry from abroad or who have existing customers who say, would it be possible to get your product to France or to Chile or to the US, wherever that is? And based on that, you then look, okay, if there's already one customer, is that enough as an anchor for our efforts? And is there maybe even an audience around that anchor customer that we can then pretty much focus our expansion onto? I take it one step further, which may have been your question anyway. There is one final element you can consider, obviously, as a business, and that sits outside of everything that I've said so far. There are, of course, markets that the UK has historically been extremely successful with, when it comes to exports. And you know, we will probably talk a little bit about some European countries, Germany and France, among others, who are extremely important market for UK exports. But when you break it down into percentages, the US, you know, and that's where I work, obviously, but the US is by far the most important destination for UK exports. Depending which statistic you take, you know, it doesn't really matter, but it's by far the most important one. And on the good side, it's interesting to see that the spread of products that are being exported to the US is pretty much quite even. So there's not any product that stands out. It's really going across the board. When you look at services, traditional business services are doing particularly well. I mean, all services do okay, insurance and financial services, but traditional business services, IT services, legal services, and so forth, do extremely well. So, and that, of course, you know, can give you an idea. If you're lucky to have an anchor client already, great, you know, explore that. If you're lucky to do a market study that tells you, okay, that would be a good market, great. And even if you don't, then you can also look at, okay, where has the UK traditionally been good at? And maybe this is something where we can start. One final element on that, and I alluded to this in the beginning, is the UK is very good in terms of providing support. And, you know, Mark is here from DIT, fortunately, and that more with certain countries than with others. And that, you know, that may be dependent on size or history. But the UK, for example, has a fantastic support network for exports into the EU. It's a fantastic support network for exports into the US. And I'm sure there are other regions that Mark can also cover. So if you then combine everything, you know, you may have an anchor client, you've done a market study potentially that has been co-funded by a government or a private stakeholder. You look at where the UK has traditionally been good at, and then add the support system that is being provided. Then you actually may have an idea, okay, which market should I focus on as a business? Thank you so much.
David, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. And, you know, Emmanuel talks about market research and, you know, making sure that you've got countries that you've got an affinity to or an angle with. You know, do you have anything else that could be done on top of that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the government schemes and DIT are absolutely superb. You know, working with chambers of commerce, working with business partners, you know, working with your freight company, because, you know, they are actually in all these markets. I mean, we have a lot of companies that look to find new markets, find alternative customers in their market. So we have our international trade portal, and all that does is just bring public information into one place. So it will scrutinize who the importers are of your product in a particular country, where the main market is on that. Is it declining? Is it increasing? And giving the names on that. That's been very useful for companies just to identify that market, because a lot of companies make the mistake and say, I'm going to export to Europe because it's close. Actually, it may not be the right market for you. Whereas they may say, I'm going to the US, or I'm going to Asia, or actually Australia and New Zealand are too far. It may not be for your product, and you may actually get the benefits for that. So research is absolutely key. What the DIT offer is absolutely superb, but it's key to do your research. Our international trade portal can also help on that, but there's no one set source of information. If you utilize everything that is available, you will find that key market, and then dip your toe into it, find those customers, and have that ability to, is it a goer in that market? And don't be afraid to say, do you know what, I don't think this is the right market for me, and then pivot out of there and pick the right market. Don't keep going in the hope that you will achieve something, because that can waste an awful lot of time and money for you. Be very reactive and find that right market. And this is where we find SMEs are so much better than doing it than the larger corporates, because they have that ability to make that change. And that's something that we admire them on, and just finding that right partner in country.
Yeah. And I know we've spoken to customers that are looking to move internationally, and we'll often ask, when you've been consulting, right, is there a particular country I should go to? I mean, are there anything that you have spoken to them about that you would add on top of the advice that's already been provided?
I think. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ollie. No. It's just a really quick one in relation to it. It's just understanding the risk in that country, and picking the difficult countries. But Oliver, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to an earlier point that was made out about the market research, I mean, people have the ability now to look at where they're getting hits on their websites, and whether it's Google Analytics or some free solutions out there where you can actually see where you're getting traction from on your website, which you may not be then fulfilling with orders, is one way to do it. And going back to Manuel's point about knowing where your customers are, if you've not started on that cross-border journey yet, but you're getting requests, make sure that you keep a track of where these requests are coming from that you're not fulfilling. That when you do eventually take that step, you already know where your product is hitting with. And to the point about which countries, I think, and it's already been suggested, localization of your offering is key to these markets. And if the market is has their English as their first language, obviously that's gonna overcome some significant barriers for you to easily get online before you then have to try and localize your website, which is probably the second stream of opportunity and revenues that you would go for.
Yeah. And then Andrew, I guess there's some challenges, right? Because when I look at what countries to go to, for example, we've been looking at, for example, alcohol shippers, and there's some very different regulations in and around different countries on their import rules. How would you go about identifying whether your product can be shipped to those countries?
Yeah, well, to be quite honest, a bit like everybody's said here, research, planning and prepare. It's certain goods are prohibited and restricted in certain countries, and you need to understand that. So, if you're shipping clothing, etc., or shoes, and all of a sudden you're shipping lizard skin shoes that requires a CITES license, 99% of your goods are all fine, and obviously a shipment might get delayed at customs or brokerage because there's missing documents or paperwork. What you will find that if you choose whatever your first country is, or a group of countries. Obviously, the EU 27 single market follows much the same rules and regulations of customs, etc. So that might be because it's geographically close and a big market, that you might find that the most easiest, rather than some other countries elsewhere. But yeah, you need to do your research and prepare and know what goods can or can't be shipped, such as dangerous goods, hazardous goods, and goods that, you know, a carrier such as UPS wouldn't carry. But so here's an example that if you're choosing the EU market, that in Spain, a lot of online marketplaces have had this issue, that in Spain, private importers cannot import beauty products, creams, hair dyes, cosmetics, perfumes, medical devices, medicines, and obviously had to either block their website or make sure those commodities aren't shipped to Spain, because they will not get customs cleared and will not get delivered. So quite a good thing that, like, you know, you ship to EU 27, but Spain has got slightly different rules. So you need to understand what you can sell and where. But obviously from a UPS perspective or brokerage, we try and de-skill and make those things and our customer-facing shipping systems as easy as possible. Yeah, don't get caught out that you don't know the rules and regulations, because I always say Google is your best friend, and you can find most things out by a couple of clicks away. And as somebody has already said on here, that, you know, most of the world in business speaks English, so you should have an advantage, you know, from the UK shipping. And a lot of countries still do want our products.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And that's a good point, and it ties back to the earlier comments about the scattergun approach. You know, I think it is that taking it step by step and not understanding that not all continents have the same rules. It is country by country, and to very clearly pick and go step by step, as opposed to trying to turn everything on, because especially for smaller businesses, you don't have the time to figure out all the different rules at the same time. So it is taking it slowly and taking that approach for sure. And I guess, you know, Mark, there was a question here about any new trade regulations that people should be aware of, and things that are coming up in 2022 that need to be considered.
Yeah, indeed there are. I mean, it would be foolish of me to ignore the big B word, or European exit. Some of the changes that are coming up are as a result of that, of course, but not all. One of the things that is not as a consequence of us leaving the European markets is the, or the European Union, is the HSS codes, because it's on a 5-year renewal or a review. And I know there's been a lot of changes to the HSS codes, which can be, for a new exporter, it maybe isn't so much of an issue, but for someone who's perhaps had a bit of an experience of exporting, it's always best to check those, because there are implications both as the exporter and for the customer on the other side in terms of importing. There's a lot of changes in terms of customs declarations, which obviously have changed from the 1st of January, and you have to have full import declarations now. Right at the start, whereas before it could be delayed for, I think, the potential for 6 months to be delayed. Within the food and drink sector, there's new rules which have come into place from 1st of January. You have to notify authorities when you're importing from the EU, and then full checks, including documentary requirements, will be implemented from the 1st of July. So that's connected and will happen as a consequence in the summer. Rules of origin, the 1-year grace period, has now expired, and more stringent checks are coming in, and obviously that will be the evidence required at the time of import or export has changed. So businesses will need to ensure that they have supply declarations or evidence of origin. I think one of the things I would say is, I think Andrew used the expression plan and prepare, and I don't think we can stress that enough. As I said earlier when I first spoke, that there are hurdles, should we say, for what I'm not going to use the word barriers, because that means you can't get past them, or there's a potential for you not to get past them. Let's call them hurdles. There's always a way around, and I think due diligence, research, we've touched on all the hot words, if you like, I think already, in terms of plan and prepare. And if you do that, you can surmount the hurdles, get over them, you know. Yes, there's regulation changes. Is that the end of it? Probably not. You know, who knows? Probably not. But again, and I would stress, and I thank everyone so far for being so complimentary about the Department for International Trade. There's a lot of help, free advice. Yes, you can get outside third parties, consultants and things, but what we offer from the Department for International Trade is for free. And someone touched upon it before. We have got people around the world, 3,000 people work for the DIT, so it's a big organization. We've got boots on the ground. I'm sorry to use these expressions, but we've got people around the world that we can reach out to get local information, because I think that's also invaluable as well. Because, you know, I think the most disheartening thing, someone touched upon it in terms of a small business, you haven't got perhaps the workforce, and time is a big issue. If you're going to have to do due diligence, I think it's reassuring to know that we can speak to people over in foreign desks, in consulates, high commissions, embassies, wherever, and they can give us that local information. And whilst Google is good, and I agree with it, you know, it's also reassuring, I think, to know that you can speak to people who are actually in that marketplace, because that local knowledge helps, and it's an invaluable source, I think, to know locally what is hot and what's not. And you just lean on that, you know, lean on the support that's there, the support networks there. You'd be stupid not to use it, eh?
Yeah, especially when you're a business that's just started, right, and you haven't got the budget sometimes to be doing the market research or have the time to do the expertise, because you want to plug it into your brand. So I think it's key that there are these services that you can sort of lean into. And you're going to say something, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on a couple of points that Mark mentioned there. That obviously from the 1st of January, there was obviously more stringent rules, and it affects all our shippers and traders from the UK into the European Union to make sure all your commercial invoices or data into UPS has the declaration statement to say it meets the rules of origin. Really important, because you don't want to be paying duties into the UK or into the European Union. And you always, we talked about research, but you always have to keep up to date. It's a bit like you have to follow the Northern Ireland rules and negotiation. And there's so many things that are changing. It's an ever-changing world. So once you think you've got your commodity codes, your tariffs and rules and regulations, it's not long before there's a new system or a new procedure. So it's ever ongoing and changing. So yeah, there were some more changes, and there's some more changes coming in between the UK and the EU as far as safety and security. But it might be at this point mention, choose your carrier and choose your freight forwarder or parcel company very wisely, because you want somebody that's got a global reach. You don't want to have to deal with 10 or 15 different businesses with different rules and procedures and systems. That can be complex and confusing. And as I say, you want somebody that's got a global reach and got that understanding and can carry your goods. And obviously the parcel integrators do a door-to-door service, so we take a lot of the complexity away from the shipper, because we're the haulier, we're the airline, we're the carrier, we do the customs clearance, and we do the whole thing door-to-door. So as I say, choose your partners and choose your business partners wisely. Make sure you've got the correct data and documentation, and then obviously a lot of those difficulties can become easier.
Yeah, I can second what Andrew just said. You know, work with a good partner. I've been on UPS's page many times, and they have a lot of good information there and walk you through a number of things that you wouldn't otherwise easily find on the internet. Of course, there may be limits, but you know, Andrew and colleagues will be the right people to tell you how much they can do as part of your expansion journey and whatnot. You can also, of course, you know, referring again to DIT, look at the UK government website, www.gov.uk/exports-goods. You know, they have a good website there where you can just add in what product you have, where it's meant to go, and etc. And then it will tell you a number of rules and regulations to consider. One other thing to also keep in mind is that there's certain markets, and we discussed that in the preparation for this call, that have a higher threshold for tax-free imports. The US is one of those, where you have a minimum threshold for import taxation at $800. That means that if you have goods that are below the $800, they're not subject to any duty. They're still subject, of course, to individual rules and regulations that you need to be aware of so that you know that your product is compliant. But there are a number of UK businesses, and we're really talking here about small and mid-sized businesses, but who do smaller shipments to US customers directly from the UK, and who use that higher threshold of the US, the $800, to get their products in a very uncomplicated way to their customers. It's a very cost-effective and very easy way that you can consider as part of your thinking.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually really impacts the customer experience at the other end for your customers, right? And you are making sure that there's as limited charges at the other end for delivery as possible, right?
Yeah, and it's also less likely that your product gets stuck at the border. You know, I mean, that is, of course, you know, not possible if you have larger shipments to make or high value items. But for those, you know, I mentioned earlier the pet gravestones. They also do like little metal plates that you can put on a gravestone. You know, you're talking here of 100 or 200 pound value. So, and these can be just shipped via UPS or another logistics provider directly to the customer without any problems with their being produced in the UK and then being shipped directly, and usually don't sit at the border anywhere, and also don't have to meet any specific regulations, at least not in that case. So it makes it quite easy. But of course, you know, hopefully soon the business will reach the next stage, but it's a step-by-step process. You know, you start and then you take the next step and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, so Ollie, we've just heard lots of tips, you know, what to consider when you're thinking about going out. So, you know, as a business, what should we think about here when planning sort of our e-com export strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about it several times when you said, you know, consider your product. So is there demand in that country or in that region for that product? But so once you've done that due diligence, you know, think about what the competition's like in terms of, you know, can you fulfill your orders while maintaining a competitive price point versus the local competition? Because don't forget, consumers tend to look cross-border because either they can't source the product locally, and we touched on it earlier with the British brands, the heritage that we do so well with, or the price and the quality is better from abroad. But then, so once you've identified that market and, you know, right, we're going to go full steam into that area, then, you know, what's my consumer proposal going to be? You know, does it require local language personalization? Is there a currency change requirement and payment options that can vary from market to market? Taxes and duties, you know, do you want it to be seamless and arrive paid if there is going to be any, or do you expect that consumer to pay for any tax and duties at delivery if they're applicable? And the service options for transportation, you know, how quick can you get them there versus the cost, and how quick would that be versus a consumer buying from a domestic retailer? You know, and that's why we've been really successful as an exporter to the US. You know, we can hit a consumer in the US as quickly as a consumer will experience from buying from a US domestic-based retailer, and so that's why you've seen the growth of the e-commerce retailers who use that lane. But then you also have to consider some other things that you may not have such complexities from a UK domestic view. When you're talking about returns, you know, what will be your consumer offering for a cross-border returns when there's significantly more complexity than there is within your home market? And I think Andrew hit the nail on the head. You know, you need to liaise with your partners while you're building this strategy, and that's not just from a logistics provider. That's from, you know, who sits behind your website platform. You know, what payment provider you use. You know, it's those relationships that you need to sit down and incorporate into your strategy when you're taking your e-commerce global.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so Andrew, you know, what sort of challenges when exporting goods from the UK? What challenges are you seeing, and like how do we overcome some of the main challenges that people are finding, especially the smaller businesses that might not have dedicated experts within their business?
Yeah, well, there are challenges. mainly because there's a new customs system coming on in the UK this year, and next year for import and export. But in the UK, not too many challenges. If you know what's prohibited, restricted, dual use goods or licensable, then generally the goods shouldn't get delayed at the border. But quite often, you know, a customer has some missing data, missing invoice, missing commodity code or a description. And quite often they can be challenging because they cause a delay at the border where somebody has to contact somebody, phone up and check. But there are rules and regulations that you need to follow, and your freight forwarder parcel company will look after your interests there and do your customs clearance. And the same, obviously, we've talked about HMRC, the UK global tariff is online, a lot of it as far as what the rules and regulations are for exporting. But I just want to step back just very quickly because somebody mentioned it about returns. We do find that quite often e-commerce businesses have challenges with returns, or it's quite high in cost. Very nice to sell all your widgets to a certain country. Soon there's a delay or a return, or refused, etc., and that can cause challenges. So plan your returns policy, where the goods go to, who pays, who gets a refund, and make sure so that the customs clearance are returning the goods back to the UK, if that's what's going to happen, that you have return goods relief and you don't pay duties and taxes on those goods again. So returns are really important. But UK rules and regulations as far as exporting shouldn't be too much of a difficulty. It's always sometimes the unknown rules and regulations in some of those destination countries. But if you stick to the major industrialized trade lanes, shall we say, we've mentioned those EU, US, Australia and other, then you're less likely to get caught out. But returns can be painful. And again, it's the same sort of thing. Do your research and know what you're shipping. You know, do your goods require excise? Do they need a cytosanitary certificate? Does it need an export license from the UK government? So quite a lot of things to consider if you're shipping products around the world, just to make sure it goes seamlessly and smoothly.
Yeah, and I guess it's that cost effectiveness of the returns to consider whether you need to have a separate international returns policy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, David, we're kind of getting into the questions now where people want to kind of put it into action and how do they do it. And I mean, as much as we all have a passion for the business and we want to do well, it is kind of important to think about cash flows and making sure that the business is giving us the returns that we kind of need to look for. So one of the questions we've got is sort of, you know, in terms of financial planning for the international expansion, and how do you put together a solid financial roadmap as you look to ship globally?
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I think from that perspective, you know, the cash flow, that working capital, the lifeblood of the financial side is key, because if you run out of cash or you don't get paid, you know, it could be catastrophic for your business. So I think you really have to, first of all, engage with the bank or your financial provider early. That's probably one of the biggest issues we face is, you know, from across all the banks, we're bought in at the very last minute. And by that time, everything has been agreed and it's very difficult to change that. I think from looking at your supply chain, where you're buying from, making sure you've got the right funding mechanism for that, through to your manufacturing process, if you're manufacturing, or if you're just wholesaling, then, you know, how you facilitate that, through to exporting and where you're exporting to. And there's a number of aspects that are pretty clear on that. And, you know, it comes into what shipping terms have you negotiated, because if you've negotiated an FOB term versus a CIF on the larger shipments, that will have an impact on potential time that you can receive funds on the back of selling those goods, but also the cost in relation to that. And you have to ensure that you've got sufficient margin to actually repay any borrowing and also make a profit for yourselves. So it's not just the financial aspect. You've got to overlay everything to it. And, you know, you've got to include the, you know, what if scenario. And that's something we saw really clear in the pandemic, where we had customers shipping goods to a market that was open, but by the time it arrived, it was closed, and that market had closed. How do you mitigate? How do you ensure that you get paid on that? And it's ensuring that you get that right payment mechanism. And there are always a number of options for that, but you use that in your negotiation for your overseas sales. And by having those tools in your back pocket, you can then decide what is best for you and your company to ensure that you are able to fund that full working capital cycle. Because what we have seen typically, if you're selling in the domestic market, your working capital cycle could be 60 days, 60, 75 days. For an overseas contract, it's typically 120 to 150. And you have to make sure you have the right mechanism and funding in place, because you have absolutely doubled your funding need in that period. So you just got to make sure you have that right solution.
Yeah, that's important. And Mark, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, and especially when it comes to the fact that not all countries will be paying through the same payment methods even.
Yeah, I think the theme running through everything that we've discussed really on this webinar is the need for research. And I know sometimes people will think about that, it's not as attractive perhaps a proposition to do the research, and some people are either good at it and others aren't, but there is no substitute for it. You have to do your research into the markets that you're looking and take everything into account. I mean, I had an experience where somebody recently was just about to quote prices out to Saudi Arabia, and it's something we don't normally do or get involved with, but because I had a good working relationship with the clients, I asked them to, or they asked me rather, whether they could send the costings through, and it was just the most simple thing that they'd missed out, was actually how they were going to get the goods. I know it sounds ridiculous, but how much it was going to cost to physically get the goods there, and what they were looking at was only how much they knew that the goods would sell for in that country. And if we hadn't have had that conversation, they would have been exposed to thousands of pounds. And it was just in an instance, it struck me because I knew what I was looking for. And I said, you haven't costed in the cost of freight. Oh, and it's not attractive. It's not, it's the most time consuming of things, but do your research and include everything in, factor everything in, because if you stay tenacious and just keep at it, it will be okay. But as I think David pointed out, you have to take into account that you're exposing yourself to twice the amount of financial risk if you don't do your due diligence. It comes down to that every time. But as I say, the surmountable hurdles.
Well, I appreciate that. It almost sounds like a scary ending, but it's not, right? I mean, there's lots and lots of resources and materials and market research that you can get for free, that places like Lloyd's or the DLT or BAB can provide you, that they already have, that they can supply and to help and support you doing that. And I appreciate the last comment. I don't think logistics is always seen as the most fun bit of any business or the transportation of goods, but yeah, definitely needs to be factored into some costs. So I think we've just got 7 minutes left now, so I would like to sort of get to the end of the webinar by getting a small tip from each of you on what our small businesses need to consider as they look to go global. So maybe Mark, if we could start with you.
I think I've already said it. Do your research, do your due diligence, and be tenacious, because trust me, it really is worth sticking at and doing, because it can lead to great things overseas. And there's nothing, I don't think there's anything more exciting. I personally got excited by it over 30 odd years ago when we sent an order out down to South America, and it was coming from the factory where I was at, and we actually saw it being loaded. And there's a satisfaction in having goods around the world and somebody saying thank you for that and enjoying what you've sent them. There is a satisfaction, not least that there's a profit at the end of it as well. Not always the bottom line that you look at. I guess some guys on here would say it is, but there is satisfaction in supplying your product to somebody on the other side of the world. And that was 30 years ago, so it's only got better now, I think.
Brilliant. Emmanuel?
Well, thank you. Most of the businesses that we at British American Business work with are really at the beginning of the expansion journey. So I used my top tip to make a little bit of marketing for something that British American Business produced in one of our last trade and investment guides that we did for the US, but it doesn't really matter whether it's the US or any other country. We wrote a feature that pretty much walks you through the six biggest questions that a business you should ask yourself, and it helps you then to pretty much find your way through all the information that you find out there, and much of what we have discussed today, really starting from what is your business, what is your product, are you an exporter or investor or both, and then just, based on the answer, it takes you to a new section, and that really helps you to cut down your time in trying to find out, what is it I need to know, where do I need to go, who can help me, and how do I in the end get to where I want to be. So that would be my top tip, looking at that feature in British American Business Trade and Investment Guide, how to make it work, getting started.
Yeah, from my perspective, not overlaying what Mark said, but for me, it's very much around the finance. Get the finance model in place early. There will be a number of solutions available for you. But look at that and draw out that timeline of the transaction, incorporating the finance, the freight, the insurance, everything in relation to that end to end. But it's never a better time. The companies that have started exporting that we're looking after are the more successful ones. They're generating some good profit, and back to Mark's point, they're enjoying what they do and getting that satisfaction of seeing their products go globally.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to share those different products and things, which is great. Ollie?
I would say use the expertise that's available to you. I mean, just on this call now, you've got 3 or 4 organisations that can help and support you get to where you want to get to. Even just from a logistics perspective, your carrier is the expert. They can support you on your requirements, as your services, potential barriers, etc. And then they'll also offer you technology. Maybe 2 good points. Use the technology that's available to you as well. These things allow you more time to focus on your business. Your expertise is in your e-commerce business and your retail business. So leverage what's available to you so you can hit your desire for growth in whatever market you're trying to achieve it in.
And Andrew, I know it might be difficult to pinpoint you to one, because I'm sure you've got many tips for us.
Yeah. Okay, so really for traders, if you choose the EU, and if you're a B2C trader, e-commerce, and you want it to be as seamless as possible to your customers, just be aware, when we talked about research, about you might need to get EORI registered in the European Union in a member state, VAT registered so that you can pay and reclaim VAT back, IOSS registered in the European Union as a UK trader, importer of record, fiscal representative. So to be as seamless as possible for B2C, for you sitting in the UK to successfully, trade into the European market, there might be some other steps and processes to do there. So do your research. And obviously our shipping systems and solutions around the world, whether it's for your shippers or traders or returns, it's almost the same services, same system, same type of shipping. So for you with your partners and businesses, there are some easy solutions out there that make the whole global shipping process a lot easier for you.
Brilliant, thank you. So as we bring this to an end, I'd like to ask the attendees to make sure you have a look in the chat for more links to register to continue guidance from the DIT, from Lloyd, from UPS, to get access to more informative materials and to support your view to go global. I would like to offer a huge thank you to all of the panelists. It's been an absolute pleasure and education, so I really appreciate that. And thank you, and hopefully we can all have this conversation together again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.